This is our historical timeline by Abby Vargas, Kayla Porta, Grace Tovar, and Shelby Nelson.
Okay. This is titled the Bilingual Education Act. In the late 19th century, millions of immigrants entered the United States with limited English speaking abilities, and many schools segregated against these students for not being able to speak English. So in 1967, Senator Ralph Yarborough of Texas introduced a bill to help school districts educate all ELL students. So this act was the first official acknowledgement of the needs of the students with limited English ability. The act provided assistance to school districts in establishing educational programs for limited English speaking ability students. The act also provided funds in form of grants for resources for things such as educational programs, training for teachers, materials, and parent-involved projects. The implications for this act was that it allowed all English language learners to receive a proper education with the help of the school funds that are able to support and teach ELL students to become successful. The limitations was that to receive funding for bilingual programs, the projects are to be evaluated at the end of each year, and they do not meet the requirements that they will. If they do not meet the requirements, they will not receive funding. The Brown versus Board of Education of 1954, some of the key points are that Brown was not a single case. Instead, it was combined in 5 districts such as South Carolina, Delaware, Virginia, the District of Columbia, and finally, what took the final case was in Topeka, Kansas. The case in Topeka involved a girl named Linda Brown, and she was denied an admission to an all-white elementary school in Topeka, Kansas. The NAACP then filed for a lawsuit stating that it was a violation of the 14th Amendment. The act was the foundation for law now called the Individuals with Disability Education Act, and the U.S. Supreme Court found that separate facilities are inherently unequal. And so Congress had then regarded this as not only segregation, but it also segregated students that had disabilities or were ELL. The implications for this was that the Brown versus Board of Education Act allowed all students to receive a proper education regardless of their race, disability, or ability to learn, and overall stopping segregation in schools. The limitations is that some argue that schools, however, continue to be segregated today, and this is due to that there's neighborhoods that schools are located in, and there's an education policy that allows students to receive a better education solely because of where they live.
All right. So I have Section 504 of the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So Section 504 is a national law that protects qualified individuals from discrimination based on their disability. It also not only protects people with disabilities who apply to and participate in such programs, but also job applicants and employees of the organization that provide them. For programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance, there is no minimum threshold for coverage. Furthermore, there is no requirement that recipients or executive agency have a certain number of employees. So the implications, Section 504 forbids organization and employers from excluding or denying individuals with disabilities and equal opportunity to receive program benefits and services. It defines the right of individuals with disabilities to participate in and have access to programs, benefits, and services. The limitation is students have to get labeled with a disability to get a 504 plan. Some families want to keep disabilities private or disagree that their child has a disability. 504 plans open the door to school disability assessment, which may contain data a parent disagrees with. And then Lau versus Nichols, 1974. So it ruled that under the Civil Rights Act of 1963, a California school district receiving federal funds must provide non-English speaking students with instructions in the English language to ensure that they receive an equal education. The Supreme Court ruled that refusing to provide non-English speaking students with supplemental language course violated the California Educational Code and Section 601 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The case centered on San Francisco Unified School District, which had nearly 2,900 non-English speaking students of Chinese ancestry. The implication, the Law versus Nichols case ended in unanimous decision in favor of bilingual instruction to help non-native English speaking students improve their English language competency. Limitations, however, some argued that the Supreme Court left the question unresolved. The court never specified what steps the school district needed to take in order to decrease English language deficiency. Under law, school districts must provide some sort of supplemental instruction, but how much and what to remain up to their discretion.
Okay, for the Castaneda versus Pickard case of 1978, key points are Roy Castaneda filed a court case against Raymond Independent School District in Texas. He claimed that the school district was failing at providing appropriate bilingual education programs to help overcome language barriers. Castaneda claimed that his daughters have been harmed because of this due to them being prevented from participating equally in their classroom and being put into low ability groups because English wasn't their first language. Initially, the United States District Court of the Southern District of Texas ruled in favor of the Raymondville School District, and it wasn't until 1981 when the decision was appealed. Once the case was appealed, a three-part assessment was put in place for determining responsibility for bilingual education programs. This is known as the Castaneda standard. The standards are: students must be based on sound educational theory and implemented effectively with sufficient resources and personnel. And school districts must be evaluated to determine whether they are effective in helping students overcome language barriers. Limitations include, when looking at the Castaneda standards, there has been one main concern, and that is with the amount of time that must pass before a determination can be made about the adequacy of the bilingual program. The results of this will be that many children may be harmed with inadequate programs before they can be identified. The Doe versus Withers case of 1992. Key points are: Douglas Doe was a student at Grafton High School in West Virginia. He had an IEP and needed his test read aloud to him. All teachers followed the IEP except his history teacher, Mr. Withers. Mr. Withers refused to read his test because it was unfair and unnecessary to him. Doe was continuously failing his test in only that class, which prompted his parents to take action. The court found Mr. Withers guilty of not being compliant with Douglas's IEP, and the Doe family was granted $15,000. Implications of this: this case was one of the first cases where parents took legal action against a teacher who wasn't following an IEP. Limitations: there weren't specific limitations for this, but just teachers need to be aware of students' IEP. Proposition 227 of 1998. This proposition changed the way limited English proficient students are taught in California, requires that California public schools teach LEP students in special classes taught in all English, thus eliminating bilingual classes. The proposition allows for LEP students to move from special classes to regular classes whenever the student has a good working knowledge of English. Along with the program, the program will only last a year, eliminating most programs that require LEP students to be in them for several years. Implications are: students are able to learn English at a faster rate than before. Limitations are: teachers in lower grade levels feel that they should teach in favor of the child's primary language to help them understand English more than the 20 or 30% of time that is allowed for them to do.
In the
The No Child Left Behind Act of 2002, the key points are that No Child Left Behind Act focuses on ensuring that public schools are taking accountability and putting focus on the performance of certain groups of students, such as ELLs, special education, low-income students whose achievements may be below grade level. This act required that all teachers be highly qualified, meeting their license and certification requirements in the state that they teach. This act requires that all students receive proper education and accommodations that will allow them to reach proficient levels of achievement. The implications of this are that the law held schools accountable for how kids learned and achieved. The law was controversial in part because it penalized schools that didn't show improvement. The limitations are that the No Child Left Behind failed to provide the resources to ensure that every student had the opportunity to learn and excel. As a result, achievement goals were never reached, and teachers, students, and schools were pilloried by everyone and anyone looking for a scapegoat. And Americans with Disability Act Amendments of 2008, it protects all individuals with disabilities from discrimination. It requires most employers, private and public, to make reasonable accommodations for them. It ensures that transportation, buildings, the workplace, and places open to the public are accessible to people with disabilities. And it mandates that telecommunication companies make available options for people with hearing loss and speech impairments to communicate with others. The implications of this are it sets standards for employers when it comes to workers with disabilities, maintains a fair and equal workplace for all people with disabilities. Many employees with the limitations are that many employees with disabilities may have a hard time in a workplace getting around in a timely manner. This could affect a job where tips are the main point of income. Every Student Succeeds Act of 2017. The key points are they were fully implemented in the 2018-2019 year, in place for all students, not just ELLs, and it was signed into law by President Obama. The implications are that ELL and or special education students maintain high standards, but with more flexibility to fit students' needs than the No Child Left Behind. The limitations are the high standards for testing put a lot of stress on English language learners and their teacher in schools.
And that is all.